everybody, to Expectation Management. This is the first episode. Hopefully, you guys enjoy it. So, I wanted to talk a little bit about the most powerful form of mind control out there. Right? So, everybody knows about hypnosis, everybody knows about propaganda, everybody knows about indoctrination, right? But the goal of all of these forms of mind control is to manage expectations. And a lot of people, they hear those two words together and they're not sure exactly what I mean by that. And in a lot of ways, it can be confusing. But if you think about this, how you plan and what you plan, these are all expectations, right? And these expectations that you feel determine the outcome of what you're trying to do. So, for instance, let's say you want to buy a house, buy a car, right? You've got certain expectations that you have in the product you're buying. You have certain expectations to reach the point where you're getting the thing. Now, if I can make you into a pessimist, right? If I can make you into a person who doesn't have the ability to see how any of these things are going to happen, it's going to be a lot harder for that person to be motivated to get to the point where they can actually buy a house, where they can actually buy a car, where they can actually do any of this stuff, right? And how you manage that person's expectations of the world around them is going to determine, more than anything, the results of their endeavors. So if you can manage society's expectations, you have a high probability of knowing what they're going to do and what they're not going to do, right? So a guy like Yuval Noah Harari, right, the World Economic Forum butt puppet, right? He's out there saying that people are as programmable as machines. And what he's talking about is if you have the ability to influence a person's expectations of the world around them, you can kind of determine the results that they're going to get in their world. So, how have your expectations been managed? And I'd like to see some comments there because I think it's very important. We need to share these things because, we're being managed from all sides. I'll give you a story. So, Alex Jones, for a long time, has been saying that the end is near. And in 2008, right, he was so sure that the end was so near that it managed the expectations of his audience in such a way to kind of make them paralyzed, right? So anytime you're influencing people in this way, you can actually get the result that maybe you don't immediately come forward and say you want, right? If you can have the conspiracy community managing people's expectations for you as a government or ruling body into being paralyzed with fear or trying to withdraw from society and not have an influence on society, then guess what? You've correctly managed the expectations of society to help yourself out, right? So what's immediately apparent from this example, right, is that, for instance, myself, I was hooked in. I thought this guy has been right about all this stuff. He was right about 9/11. He was right about all these things. He's telling me right now that the world is ending, right? Everything is coming to a crashing halt. Well, guess what? That gets you paralyzed with fear. I was afraid. I thought, I need to get out. I need to get away from the system, right? I need to manage my expectations appropriately based off of this information that's coming out. Well, as we can see, those managed expectations paid off better for the system than it did for the people, right? So managing expectations comes from a lot of angles you wouldn't necessarily expect. Here's another one. Let's talk about the words career path. Being on a career path is managing someone's expectations for life, right? So as we see nowadays, people have the concept of entitlement when it comes to career path. And so they're looking for a way to get to the place that their career path is supposed to lead them to. Now, as technology changes, these career paths are going to drastically change, right? Look at all of the out of work lawyers. Look at all of the people who are told that they're going to be on a career path after they leave college that have found themselves working at Starbucks. It's that career path manages your expectations in an optimistic way, right? So that management of expectations in a falsely optimistic way gets you into a lot of trouble, and you've got massive amount of crushing student debt that now you have to pay back on a barista's salary. You're starting to get it. Everything they show you on the news, everything they show you in the media is to manage your expectations. What we're starting to see now in economist type literature is they're managing everyone's expectations down. You need to live in a tiny home. You need to have less stuff. You need to downgrade. You've got too much room. You need to downgrade that. You need to, as they're stealing all the money and spending it on completely superfluous things that the United States government loves to spend the money on. It's all kickbacks. They're telling you, you need to have your expectations downgraded. Downgraded. So, this expectation management is not necessarily working out so well on that front. Like everybody knows, that's exactly why all of these mouthpieces are saying that you need to have your expectations managed, is because they've squandered everything. The people that they work for have squandered everything. And so now it's time for us to have our expectations managed. How do we get out of this trap? Well, pessimism and optimism aren't just the only options, right? Being falsely optimistic or being totally pessimistic, these aren't the way to go. We have to be able to distinguish how things are going to work out in our own lives in specific fields, in specific areas. And the only way we can do that is by putting expectations aside, right? Putting them aside, trying something new out, trying something different out, trying to become a better person, to add to our portfolio, to create without expectation. We don't need to worry about expectation when we're trying something new. And when you've tried that thing, you can look back and determine whether or not that's going to be a future option for you, right? So the first thing you need to do to manage your own expectations, to get out of somebody else's managed expectations, is to try new things. Try new things with no expectation, right? Having the expectation going into a new thing is probably the worst thing for you. You can ask any coach. The more a person thinks about a subject that they have no experience in, and the more they believe they have the experience just because they have a little bit of knowledge about it, the worse results you're going to get, right? So you're just smart enough to be stupid, right? The key is to eliminate all expectations when going into anything new. This is a great way to live because it takes a lot of the worry and a lot of the anxiety out of interactions that should be natural, that should be easy, should be going forward. So how do we get rid of those expectations? Well, there's lots of ways. There's counting, right? You've got counting, you've got breathing, you've got all this other. Now, if that's not eliminating some of those expectations and they just keep popping up in your mind, it's time to find out why these expectations are so important to you. What are the control issues? Do you feel a sense of longing to be in control of every situation you're in? Find smaller ways to just let it fly, let it go. Art is a great example. Make something that has never been made before and do it with no expectations. Don't expect it to be a masterpiece. Don't expect it to be perfect. No art is perfect. If it was perfect, humans wouldn't be making it, first off. Second, it's not about perfection. It's about doing without expectation. It's an exercise. And if you start to do without expectation, you're going to find that you can do other things without expectation. And that anxiety starts to fall away. It's one of the very important aspects of art therapy is it causes anxiety to fall away. So if you're watching this, and I've got a few people who are, give me your comments, give me your feedback. Let me know what's going on in your life. Let me know about the expectations that you might want to have managed, the expectations that you want to upregulate, right? Think about yourself. The things you can accomplish are so myriad and so vast, but you have to focus it in, and you got to get that expectation under control so that you can accomplish those tasks, right? Get into the mindset of expectation management for yourself so that somebody else isn't doing it for you, right? One other thing that I was going to talk about is something that I think is important for all young men. I've got my whiteboard here. Ooh. Expectation Management, Episode 1, Akephalos Gigantes, which is headless giant in Greek. And we're going to talk a little bit on rivalry. Now, this is kind of interesting, especially with what's going on tomorrow with the Super Bowl and all the 13s everywhere. We're going to talk about rivalry versus enemy and alliance, right? So I'm going to put here rivalry versus enemy. Can you tell the difference between a rivalry and an enemy? In your workplace, you've got rivals all over the place. This is especially important for young men because there's a matrix of rivalry versus enemy that, people can kind of go back and forth into, right? Who are your rivals? Are they your enemies? Not really. I mean, you're not going to war with them, but there's limited amount of resources and people can make themselves a hindrance to you acquiring those resources, and that would be kind of a rivalry. People could be overly corrective, right? Because they want to establish dominance, right? So rivalry versus enemy is really all about hierarchy, right? Establishing hierarchy. And in the establishment of a hierarchy, you have to know who your friends are and who your enemies are, because you don't want a person on top of you who thinks of you like an enemy. Rival is kind of a yellow light, not really a red one. But we have to think about how we fit into those hierarchies, and we have to think about how to get one place or another. Now, rivalry is incredibly important in establishing hierarchy. Incredibly important, way more important than enemies, because once we've established that somebody is our enemy, it's automatic that there's going to be a fight for hierarchical dominance, right? When we've established that these people aren't our enemies, that they're our friends, they could still be rivals, right? There could still be conflicts that arise, or there could still be contests that arise. We actually, as humans, just love to have rivalries going on all the time. I mean, we play games with each other and against each other all over the world. These are rivalries, right? We want to establish that hierarchy so that we can rise through the ranks of the hierarchy over our rivals, right? So as young men, we have to kind of look around at our peer group and understand who our rivals are and who our enemies will be. That's a hard thing to know. It really is. Not everybody's honest. And as soon as we find out that someone is sort of using us for their own ends, using us for their own uh, established hierarchy or their establishment of a hierarchy, they become our enemies, right? Because they're not fully being honest with us. But this rivalry versus enemy uh, thing is going to definitely manage your expectations, right? If you're in a place where you feel like all of your rivals are your enemies and you don't have a choice about that, right? It's going to be very, very shaping of your expectations in the future. And what do we see in high school situations, right? With these young people who feel like they're surrounded by enemies. Well, their expectations for life start to dip, right? And then we start to see the teen suicide rates and the school shooters and everything else is because their expectations have been managed to such a degree by the rivalries and enemies that they have at school that they don't feel like they even have a future. And if you don't feel like you have a future, well, there's only one of two options: find a better place or, so that expectation management is coming from the people around you, right? It's how we interact with them that create a situation that manages our expectations, right? We're all in a situation where we're constantly getting feedback from our environment to interact with our expectations of that environment. Where, you see a broken window, you see broken bricks, you see run down buildings, you see broken down cars, you see destroyed homes. You're not going to be thinking that this is a place where new and vibrant things are coming, right? It's junk. That's your expectation, right? The key is to see beyond the physical world, this physical milieu of junk, the physical everything, and to see the potentials. When you could start to see the potentials in your rivals, when you could start to see the potentials in your enemies, when you could start to see the potentials in the world around you, that's going to change your expectations. It's going to change them so drastically that you might actually be the one rising to the top of the hierarchy. Hierarchy is primarily about first users, right? The first person who uses a thing is generally at the top of the hierarchy. The expectation to fail is a big one. Difficult to manage for some, but for others, it's not even a bump. It's 100% true, right? We got to get to the point where it's not a bump anymore. Unfortunately, the expectation to fail is a very, very strong one. It's a very strong one. So how do we do that? Like I said before, get into art. Start making art. Expect to fail in the art, right? And what you'll find is that even when you're expecting to fail, you might be able to see a little something, a little redeeming quality in that thing that you've produced, simply because you produced it and because your ability to evaluate what you're making is something special to you, right? I talk about Thea a lot, right? Thea is the goddess of value. She's the original laser-eyed goddess, right? Thea is where we get the term theology. This is where we get the term theocrats. Anything having to do with religious things comes from Thea. Now, Thea, what was her purpose? What was her role? She was a titan, right? A titaness. And this titaness gave value to all of the gemstones, all of the metals, all of the precious anything, right? How is that related to religion? They want to control what you see as valuable and what you see as worthless. Is that expectation management? You bet your ass it is. If you view something as being valuable, if you view something as being worthwhile, if you view something as being worthy of pursuit, and somebody else put that into you, you become their machine, right? Maybe that's the purpose of some of the religions we have today, is for you to become a machine of someone else who wants to manage your expectations. Something to think about. But we know for a fact that the government has that view, and we can see it most clearly in taxation policies, right? So if they're slapping a tax on something, they want to profit from it, A, and B, they want to discourage you from seeing any value in that thing, right? So excessive taxation on luxuries, they're saying, oh, you don't need all these luxuries. We're going to tax the hell out of it. And the rich people are going to pay these things. Well, obviously at that point, it's going to go up in value, right? Since the rich people already want it. And now, it's become more expensive. And then we get into the art trade, right? So these god-awful pieces of modern art, which are clearly just money laundering scams, right, are worth so much money. And they're bought and sold and traded. But really, is there any intrinsic value in that, blue line across a white canvas? Banana taped to a wall? Give me a break. Come on. We know what's going on there. What they want to do is not pay taxes. And the way they get there is by buying a bunch of this crap that clearly has no talent. Nothing, right? But the influence that they have is far greater. And if you're purchasing these things for a massive amount of money, automatically the valuation goes up, even though it's complete garbage, right? I mean, anybody can take a brake pad and slap it on a canvas and then claim it's art. But the people who do, the vast majority of the people who do, never get it sold for a massive amount of money. But some people are connected, and those connections are really what's being valued, and that is changing the expectation of the art. Back to buying and selling. Buying and selling is all about expectation. Expectation management of buying and selling that's what the market is. The entire market is these internal valuations, right? And so what we do when we're purchasing something is we're saying we're willing to pay a little bit more than that asking price, right? And the seller is willing to let it go for a little bit less because he values the money more and you value the thing that you're purchasing more, right? So there's a meeting in the middle at this price point where you're like, well, I can do that. I can pay that to get what I want. And the other guy is thinking, well, obviously now I know what this is worth. So every purchase, every sale, once it's over with, that price is now, objective. But before that, if you're not buying and nobody's buying, then the seller's option is to reduce the price. And hopefully that reduction in price motivates buyers to get off their ass and start to purchase that thing because they're trying to meet in the middle. So if the prices of things are always up in the air, is anything intrinsically valuable if we're talking about price? No, there's no intrinsic value. It all comes from the human. Back to Thea. Back to exactly what we're saying here with Thea had supposedly laser eyes that could give her the ability to value things. Well, if you know a little bit about Greek mythology, we're made out of the Titans, right? And so the Titans, like Prometheus, right? He said to form us out of clay. Well, his whole family were Titans, and their attributes were passed on to us through Prometheus, right? And so one of those attributes would be from Thea, this idea of valuation. And what's interesting about Prometheus too is that he had forethought, going back to the expectations, right? Forethought and value. Forethought and value. These are expectations, right? If you're going to break down the definition of expectations, it has to be forethought and value. These two things meeting, that's your expectations. Because it's not just about money, right? Value is in everything. If we don't see value in cleaning up our room, if we don't see value in cleaning up our apartment, it's not going to get clean. And we're eventually going to run into, a breaking point. But once that value, right, meets that forethought, now we're talking. That's when the expectation gets you motivated to do something about it. Forethought and value, right? These are all very important economic principles when it comes to understanding ourselves better, understanding what we value, understanding where we're going in the future. And if we don't really have a firm grasp of who we are and what we value, somebody else is going to step in and tell you who you are and what you should value and what career path you should be on. Now we're back to expectation management, right? Expectation management. So it's been about 30 minutes. I appreciate you guys for watching. This has been episode 1 of expectation management. To get back into hierarchy of rivals versus enemies, it's very important to understand that our rivals are going to be managing our expectations. Very important to understand that. Take a look at your rivals. Think about how you can manage their expectations so that you can work together as a team better. Everybody on the team are rivals, but they come together and they work to get things done in the same direction. Making rivals into an alliance is how you get a team, right? And the way you get to that point is that team has to have their expectations managed in such a way that they think there's value in coming together and working with these other people, right? So rivalries, enemies, and alliances have everything to do with the management of expectations. And I think that's more important for young men because obviously we don't react to rivalry the same way women do. We need rivalry. Iron sharpens iron, right? We need to have a little bit of friction and a little bit of discomfort so that we can figure out how to do things a little bit better, right? So young men need to know about rivalry, enemy, and alliance. Very important to teach them that. If you've got little boys, start teaching them about rivalries and alliances and how to form alliances out of rivalries. That's a valuable skill. That's a valuable skill everyone is looking for. Making rivals into alliances is one of the most important things, and it's going to upregulate everyone's expectations. Upregulating in a very honest way. So I thank you for joining me. This has been Expectation Management, episode 1. If you like it, share it, show it to your friends, comment next time, interact a little bit. I thank you for leaving the comment there, Sleepwalker. You're a good follow on Twitter. So check out Sleepwalker, SLPWLKR. Great follow. Good guy. Thank you, and I'll see you next time. This has been Expectation Management, episode 1.